really not sure what I'm doing up here, but I remember years ago I told my dad I was going to study for the ministry. I worked at the Veterans Administration at the time, and he said, "You're a damn fool if you do." Because he said, when you work for the government, you have a job insured for life. Well, I quit my job there. I'd worked there a number of years, and I enjoyed my work with the Veterans Administration. Worked in the insurance division. And I went to school, Seattle Pacific University. There I met a girl that I later married. And then I got a call from one of my fellow workers at the Veterans Administration, and I went down to visit them. And they were sitting around, some were crying. What they had done, they had taken the VA office in Seattle and decided to merge it with the one in Minneapolis. Now here I was, going to school on the GI Bill, getting paid for it, and here they were out of a job. I didn't tell my dad about this incident, but nevertheless, I believe that God has been with me many times through the years. He really has. And He's with me now. And He's with you, each one of you. I remember the first day before I went to school, my mom wanted me to sit down. She wanted to talk to me. She said that the first time I saw you, I cried. She cried the first time she saw me. Why in the world would she cry? Was it because I was so good looking and so handsome? No. I had red hair. And she warned me that I would be talked to about my red hair. I would be called names and everything else. And the next day I went to school for the first time. And she was right. Red, wet the bed. You know, I started to do that. I remember one night my mom woke me up. It was about 7:30. And she wanted me to go to the bathroom so I wouldn't wet the bed because I'd been doing that. Sorry, Mom, you're late. The bed was wet. Red, better dead than red. And I used to think about that. Thought maybe it would be better if I died, and I used to pray that I would die. Well, one thing I knew about this conversation was that my mom hated red hair. She talked to me about a cousin she had, a cousin Lexi. And Lexi had red hair. And she had the most awful disposition that my mother could imagine. She just didn't like Lexi at all. Well, I like Lexi now because I have a granddog named Lexi. I had two brothers. My older brother, he was born first, and he was 2 years older than I. He had blonde hair, and then I came along with red hair. I have two daughters. The eldest one, the first one, was a blonde, sitting up here. And the second one guess what? It's a redhead. I didn't cry when I saw her. I felt her because she was a part of me. Well, anyway, when I went to school, I was beat up many times because of my red hair. There was one person who loved to beat me up. His first name was Roger. And my grandfather died in a fire, a house fire. And I found his gun later, and I bought some bullets for it. And I was doing target practice in a nearby orchard. I was shooting fruit from trees. And I intended to shoot this Roger with that gun. And I explored around the school, and I found a place where I could hide the gun and get away with it. But I gave up the idea later on because I had found Jesus Christ. And I didn't think it'd be right for a person to shoot another person out of hate. One time I was in Seattle and I called Roger on the phone. And he was filled with hate. I even gave a sermon when I was in the pastorate down here about Roger and sent him a copy of the sermon. He still had hatred for me. He just didn't like redheads. Do you like redheads? I love redheads. There's my daughter with red hair here. I wondered why people hate things that God made us to be. And I know that people hate black people. They just can't stand them. Well, I felt sorry for black people. I worked in the post office up in Seattle with a group. Everyone was black but me. And I told them I was studying for the ministry. I worked there a year before I went back to Butler University. I don't know if you realize it, but ministers have to go 3 years beyond college in order to get ordained in the ministry. So I went to Butler University in Indianapolis. It's a school affiliated with the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And I went 3 years there, got 2 degrees, 2 master's degrees. At the graduation ceremony, I received the highest honors there. I was awarded these 2 degrees. I received a Master in Divinity, another Master of Arts. And I received the highest honors. Now, in grade school, when I first went to grade school, I flunked the first grade. Then I flunked the second grade. And so back at Butler, one of the students walked up and says, "You were the most honored person here today." And I said, "Not bad for a retard, is it?" They diagnosed me as being retarded. They sent me to a clinic in downtown Seattle, and they asked me to do certain things, and they said, "This kid will never learn a thing. He is retarded." And so at Butler University, I walked away and I thought, pretty good for a retard. Yeah. Sometimes redheads can achieve. Not all the time, but sometimes. When I was working at the church here in Fremont, California, I received a call one morning. It was a call from my brother in Seattle. And he said my older brother was in a terrible accident in Portland, Oregon. And then he hung up. And I wondered how bad he was hurt, so I called back. And my brother, his voice was trembling, and he said, he died. Well, I admired my older brother terribly. I loved him. I went up to Seattle for his funeral. I was one of the speakers at his funeral, along with the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Seattle. And then I came back down to Fremont, thinking of my brother. And there was a letter that had come to me. It was a letter from the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. establishment. They had started a march from Selma to Montgomery. And they had beaten the marchers, so they didn't continue the march. They beat them as they crossed the bridge, beat them to the ground. I'd seen that on television, and I was offended by it. And so, the next Sunday at church, I announced that I might go to Selma, because they're going to have a second march. And I was told that if I did, I would be fired. Well, you know redheads. I decided to go. Now I had two kids, these two up here. They were both under 5 at the time. So I'd pretty much given up the idea of going to Selma, because I felt a necessity to stay with my young kids and my wife. So I'd given up the idea, and then the phone rang. There was a lady on the other end, a woman I knew well, a woman I'd been in her home many times. Her name was Mabel Wright. And she said, Don, if you go to Selma, I'll make sure you'll never preach at our church again. And you know redheads. The next day I was on a plane heading for Alabama. I got down to Alabama, and we marched every day to the courthouse so blacks could register to vote. And they were turned away every day. And there was quite a crowd of us, several hundred. And every day as we marched, there was one figure that they picked out in the marchers. They said, here comes that red-headed nigger again. Well, later that week, the minister of the First Christian Church of Livermore and I were walking together through the town of Selma. I was reading the Gospel according to John chapter 17, where Jesus prays that we might all be one. And then a fellow came up to me and he says, you two are under arrest. And I said, what is the charge? And he said, shut up and get on that bus. So I shut up and got on that bus. They took us downtown. There were over 400 of us that they arrested that day. And they had us stand out. It was lightly raining. We stood there for about 3 hours. And there was one policeman who was in charge of guarding us. And he stood directly in front of me. And he kept banging his club on his hands. And he called me every name in the book. White trash, un-American, filth, no good bum. I stood there and listened to him. He didn't say anything to the others who had been arrested, just me. Redheads stand out. And then they put us in jail overnight, and we tried to get some sleep. I slept in this bench that was about 5 foot wide, and over 6 feet tall, and so it was pretty uncomfortable. There were women underneath the bench that I was sleeping on. One of the women was a school teacher from the Midwest. There was another teacher who was a supervisor in school. She was there. And then we all slept there that night, and finally they came and told us we returned to the Grand Chapel of the Baptist Church there. We said we won't go until we receive an apology. And so they came and apologized for being there, and then we walked back. And the others at Brown Chapel, they applauded and praised us. We got our name in the paper down there, 400 arrested. And staff from the regional office had gone down to Selma to be in Montgomery when Martin Luther King appeared. They didn't go during the early part of the march. I went to the early part. I didn't make the full march because they had a certain group that went the full march. But I didn't worry about being fired because I knew my original minister would find me another place to serve. So it was fine with me. One of the finest things that ever happened in my life was a number of years after I'd gone to Selma. I got a call from Florida. And it was from a fellow named Hop Russell. Some of you remember Hop Russell. He was our treasurer in the church, first church here in Selma. And he called and he said, I want you to know, Don, that I paid your expenses to Selma. It made me feel that I had a call. You did. I cried after he called. He died shortly after that. Yes, when I got back in the first board meeting, I sat there wondering what was going to happen. One young fellow, he's a good-looking guy, Kennard Nelson. Remember Kennard? He was son of Mildred Rice. He stood up and he says, I want to make a motion. And I thought, this is it. He says, I make a motion that we take up a separate offering to help reimburse Don Anderson tears came to my eyes. And offering to reimburse me. I made money by going to Selma. And deep down, sometimes red-headed readers come out ahead. God has been with me many times. He was with me down there. I think we made a difference. I think that I was the most hated person who marched in Selma because I had that name.